Am I supposed to be talking? Are you? Okay. Hello, hello. This is talking in my normal presentation voice. I guess. Hello, hello. Although, I've had this crud. All right, you got it? Okay. So now you're muting it. Good. Me too.
Because
Let me let me let me reply. There's somebody who's sick.
I had a good meeting yesterday. Did you? Carlissa, the representative from Colesburg, came. Oh, okay. And brought some good information in terms of sharing what some of the curriculum. It was good. It's good to see what's out there in terms of curriculum.
Hello, sir.
Hey,
How are you doing?
good. How are you?
Wonderful.
I see you brought other people with you. Well, I was expecting to see
Told me
you.
they'd let just anybody in
I
here,
was
so
expecting
came.
to see you at the Smoky Mountain Association gathering of all of us old park people, because it was an old guy reunion. I mean, it was everybody.
No, I didn't make it. So,
Let's see, Langdon,
yeah, let's keep.
Oh, well, no wonder, we have more people here than we think. They just didn't get their name tags.
Well, that's right. I had so far to travel to get here.
Well, I know.
Last minute.
Well, come up and sit
Hey.
near people.
I'll see you tomorrow morning and then Friday night. Our family's going
Oh,
to the. I want a room like this in church so bad. Do my Baptist studies and stuff in.
It's to that part of it. And you're always just organizing.
I am not an organizer, and I'm not, but I can show up and do stuff. How are you?
Good.
Good.
I think probably it'll be a couple more weeks before I really get to work. Gotcha. Okay, yeah.
And it's such.
This-
No, every now and then you say yes to doing something and you find out that it's crazy. Oh, I know that. You hadn't thought about that. It's good to see you there.
Doing well, are you?
Hey,
Collect from Amy. Who's Amy? She came.
right here.
No, she didn't. Oh, Tim. That's Tim. Okay. No, I'm okay with him. Who came while I was in
not
there
here.
making more coffee? Amy's not here yet. I just had. Oh, he came. Good. Yeah, I saw Parker. Okay, he's already paid. He's already paid.
She's not. We're actually making a video of this so that you, if you want to later and say, now what was it that we did or what did we say, you'll be able to go back and look at it. But then other people that weren't able to be with us today will be able to have that. So thank you for coming. I appreciate the chance to do this. This has been something that I have played with and worked with and wrestled with for a number of years, and it was one of those things that I felt like if I didn't go ahead and do it, I would still continue to play with it and work with it and wrestle with it for a few more years. And I will do that, but I'll do it with the knowledge of the things you give me today. So that will be a help to me as I continue to do with parables. My intent is to bring a storyteller's perspective to the parables and hopefully help you hear the parables differently, but also work with how to express those, whether that's in a teaching setting, a Bible study setting, or preaching setting, whatever that way is for you, and whatever opportunity presents, it'll be hopefully give you some tools today to be able to use in preaching and in Bible study, and in just personal devotional and Bible study life, a way to look at the parables perhaps a little differently. So to begin with, get your Psalter out. It looks like this. Wait, before we do that even, I want to say Cheryl has worked very hard to have everything ready for today, because I've been out of town some lately. But these booklets she put together for you. So to know how much work went into that. And I want you to know that she put it all together, and then I thought of one more thing to put in it. So she took them apart and put them back together. So that's how wonderful she is. Donna Hankins is doing our tech support, and she has taken the things we're going to watch and listen to and kind of piece those together from little things that I've handed her over the last couple of weeks. And we're going to be able to hear and see some things as the day goes on. So we've got some good people that have really worked hard to make sure we can do things.
Do we need to sign a release that we can be?
That you can be video. Yeah, we need to have the release of all of you that you will allow the back of your head to be in these videos. All right, get your psalm out. Psalm 78. All right, this side over here, Ty, you will lead this side. This will be the light print, and this side will be the dark print. Okay? Joe, you can be the lead voice on the dark print. All right, let's start out.
Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old. Things that we have heard and known, that our forebears have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell them to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord, the might and wonders God has wrought. The Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to God's law. They forgot the deeds of the Lord, the miracles that God had shown them. The Lord wrought marvels in the sight of their forebears in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. The Lord divided the sea and let them pass through it, and made the waters stand like a heap. Led them with a cloud in the daytime, and all the night with a fiery light. Cleft rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. Made streams come out of the rock, and caused waters to flow down like rivers.
Amen. Thank you. In the four Gospels, there are only two recordings of sermons that Jesus preached. You have the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. There's what gets called the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, which sounds a lot like the Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon on the Mount sounds a lot like the Sermon on the Plain, which may be that he preached that same sermon more than once, something that I'm sure you all have never done. But the only record of Jesus' preaching are those two. Now, we catch snips of them, little pieces of things that Jesus uses that were probably pieces of sermons. But to hear the whole sermon, those are the two places we hear that. What I want you to think, though, to start with this morning, and use the back, I've got extra paper or something, but I'm going to time you. But in the next 3 minutes, I want you to write down the titles of as many parables as you can remember. And start now. As many as you can do. Just a quick title, something to remember by. I should have warned you that we were going to start with a pop quiz. Okay, you've got about a minute to go. You got them all? Okay. Now just count how many you have and put that number at the top or the bottom somewhere. Just count them. Okay? Did everybody get 10? Did you get at least 10? How many of you got 15? All right. How many of you got, did you get 20? All right, open your workbook, and you can see on the first page, this is just a chart that I made up for you all. It lists 50 different parables, but they're located, between the three synoptics, they're located in about 110 different places. Okay? Because you can see some are repeated, some are in all three Gospels, some are in two. You get to the back page, and there are some that are only in Matthew, some that are just those two that are only in Mark, that kind of thing. So I just wanted you to see that, of just that sense. But the other part I want you to realize is how quickly you could do just some of them right off the top of your head. Now with prompts, you can go, oh yeah, I remember that one. Oh yeah, oh yeah. You know, with prompts you can do that. But you see how quickly you could do it, because that's partly how stories work, is that's how we remember, that's how we think. You don't, at the end of a day, say, go home and your spouse says, hey, how was your day today? What did you do? And you do not say, well, I had a brilliant thought that came to me in 3 points. See, that's because that's not the way we're wired. That's not the way we think. What you say is, oh, well, I got in the wrong line at Walmart, and you'll never believe what happened to me. And we tell the story of the day. So see, It's how we're wired. So consequently, it's how Jesus communicates. Jesus communicates the way we're wired. And so that way it stays with us. We remember things. There's a couple of things that I want to mention as we start out. Last night I watched part of the Blue Jays and the Orioles playing their wild card game, and went into extra innings and everything. And my daughter, Carolyn, is who has taught me about baseball over the years. Carolyn learned baseball much better than I did as a kid. She didn't learn it from me. She's a very smart person, so she just sat and watched and taught herself. And then she started teaching me about baseball. I used to think baseball was about, hitting home runs and getting on base. When Carolyn taught me that baseball is really about pitching. It's not about hitting, it's about pitching. And that was great to learn, because I came to appreciate the game a lot more once I knew what it was really about. Well, last night, they kept changing pitchers, you're getting into those extra innings, and at the end, it's all about pitching. And that's part of what I want you to understand about preaching, about teaching the Bible, about communicating in our church settings, is that it's about pitching. And the thing is, the best pitchers in baseball have more than one way to throw the ball. Okay? If you've got the best fastball in the league, but that's all you've got, the batter's going to adjust and start hitting it out of the park. So you've got to have a curveball, you've got to have a slider, you've got to have, you've got to have all of these other kinds of ways to throw the ball. Today, we're going to go on the pitching, the pitch of storytelling. It doesn't work every time. It's a good one, and it works a lot, but it doesn't work every time. So I want you to understand that that's the caveat to today, is don't leave here and thinking, okay, boy, this is the way I'm going to do all my sermons for the rest of my life. It's just not going to work that way. You just need to know that this becomes another way to do it, a way to pitch. This coming Friday, about 10,000 people are going to gather in Jonesboro, Tennessee, for the National Storytelling Festival, which has been meeting there. The National Storytelling Festival has been going on in Jonesboro since 1973. We started attending the festival in Jonesboro in 1985. And to help you understand, Carolyn was born in 1980 and Anna was born in 1984. So the two of them have no memory of not going to the Storytelling Festival. They have been going to the Storytelling Festival with us since they were very little. By the time Anna got to be 4 years old, Carolyn was 8, Anna just got it. She figured out what it was all about and what it was. Carolyn loved the freedom of Jonesboro, because on the festival weekend, they close the streets, and you can walk out on the street, can't get killed by a car or anything, you just can wander around. Carolyn loved that. She wasn't as into sitting and listening to stories. Anna would listen to stories hour upon hour. And the way the Storytelling Festival worked is you listen for an hour, and then you take a 30-minute break, and then there's another hour, and a 30-minute break, and another hour. And there are 6 circus tents spread out in Jonesboro. And you can wander from tent to tent and hear different tellers, or you can sit in one tent all day long and the tellers change as the day goes by. Friday, it tends to be a little more family, student-oriented. Saturday are just wonderful stories. Sunday, they start with some sacred stories in the morning and then work to the afternoon. It's just some of the best storytellers, not just in the nation, but in the world. When Anna was 4, we had been listening to stories hour after hour. And Anna was not a person who sat still easily, but she would sit hour after hour. Well, Saturday afternoon, we've been listening for a day and a half now. Michael Williams took the stage. Michael Williams is a United Methodist clergy. That time he was on board of what we call Board of Discipleship. And Michael had edited, is the editor of the Storyteller's Companion of the Bible, which I hope you're familiar with. And just Michael's a wonderful, wonderful teller. He took the stage and he told the story like meat loves salt. And it's the story of it's basically the King Lear story, but it's an Appalachian version of it. And in this, a king comes home, he's been away, and he asks his daughters, "How much do you love me?" And the two older daughters say, "Oh, Father, we love you like, we love you like, we love you like." The third daughter says, "Father, I love you like meat loves salt." Well, he's insulted. He doesn't think that's a good thing. You know, the other had such nicer speeches. And he said, "Well, if that's all you love me, you can find your own way in life." Now, it's a long story. And Michael told it extremely well that day. But it details how the two older girls wrestle the kingdom from their father and banish him, and then began dividing the kingdom and warring with each other. It also details the adventures of the youngest girl as she goes and finds her way in life. But it comes down to the end of the story. The king is wandering half mad, just out. And he happens to wander into the village where the third daughter now lives. And he meets up with her at the well at the end of the day. She recognizes him immediately, but he does not recognize her. And she invites the old man to come home with her for supper. And at supper at her home, she feeds him a meal of unsalted meat. And when he tastes it, it comes to him, "I love you like meat loves salt." And it finally makes sense. And he realizes what the daughter meant. And in that realization, he recognizes her. And they are reunited. Now, Michael told, it was probably a 30-minute story. And it was beautifully told. He finished, 800 people in this tent applauded. Including Anna's little 4-year-old hands. She looked up at me. She was in my lap. She looked up at me. She said, "That was a good one, wasn't it?" I said, "Yes, that was a good one." Gamble Rogers took the stage right after that for the second half hour of the set. Gamble Rogers was a musician, storyteller from Central Florida, very talented musician, always had a guitar around his neck, and he would just strum, just chords, as he would tell stories. Now, the thing about Gamble is that he always used the words that had the most syllables in them. He was introduced that day as Roget's Nightmare. And I mean, he was a thesaurus like I have never heard before. And he had this incredible command of the language, but always used the longest, if there were two words that meant the same thing, he always chose the one that had the most syllables in it. But he told these fun, folksy stories from Central Florida in the days, in his words, before tourism ruined it. And he just told these agricultural farming stories from Florida. That day, he told the story about a farmer during the Depression who had made good. He said, even during the Depression, folks had to eat. And so this farmer made some money, made enough money that he brought water into his house. His wife no longer had to go out to the pump and pump the water. She could go into the kitchen, just turn a knob, and water would come right out into a sink in the kitchen. And also thrilled to have this water in the house, He built a whole new room on the back of the house and put water in it. And people in the community said, why would you do those things inside your house? They said, if God had wanted you to do those things inside, God would not have given you an outhouse. Why would you do those unsanitary acts indoors? Surely you would want to go away from the house. He said, it's the modern way. It's the way of the future. And he was so proud of his new bathroom, he finished every little detail himself, including shellacking the toilet seat. Well, he went to put his tools away. His wife, also thrilled to have the new facilities, came in and sat down to christen them. Whereupon she became adhered to the newly shellacked toilet seat. Well, after much yelling and screaming, she finally got his attention. He couldn't go in because she had locked the door. She'd never had a door to lock before. She thought she would try that out on the same day. She had locked the door. He had to climb in the window. Pulled, jerked, pried, could not extract her from her predicament. So finally, he just took the seat loose and took her to the hospital. Well, of course, it being affixed where it was, she didn't really want to sit there in the cab that way, so we just put her in the back bed of the truck and threw a quilt over her and drove her through town. Well, we got her to the hospital, and there she was in the ER on all fours. The doctor walked around her 3 times. And the old man said, well, Doc, you ever seen anything like it before? And the doctor said, yes, I've just never seen one framed. Well, as you can imagine, there are about 800 people lying down on the ground laughing at this, you know. It took him 30 minutes to tell that story. But now my 4-year-old has heard this toilet seat story. She's sitting on my lap. I looked over nervously at Janice. She said, don't worry, she didn't understand it. So, we finished that day, went on back. I was serving at Seymour at the time. Monday, I drive from my office at Seymour down to Valley Grove Baptist Church where Anna is in daycare. And I pick her up. She gets in the car. We have the usual father-daughter conversation. How was your day today? Oh, it was fun. What did you do? Oh, we played on the playground. We learned about the letter Q. We colored things. We had, what'd you have for lunch? Spaghetti and green beans. Oh, that's good. That's good. And Dad, I told my teacher I went to the National Storytelling Festival. I said, good, good, good. What did your teacher say? She wanted to know if I learned any new stories. Oh, you're ahead of where I was. I'm just driving, you know, oblivious. I said, good, good. Did you? Yes, I did. She wanted me to tell one to my class. I said, oh, really? Well, what did you tell? She said, Dad, you remember that one about the toilet seat? And I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to get in the United Methodist Witness Protection Program. You know, I'm going to have to be moved so far away that no one will ever know. I could see the Tri-County News, our little local paper, you know, Methodist preacher's child corrupts Baptist children, toilet seat story featured. You know, I said, yes, I remember it. She said, I didn't think they'd understand it. So I told them like meat loves salt. But the reason I've spent time on this is I want to tell you what happened that night at bedtime. After going to the potty 3 times and 4 glasses of water and 2 more stories and another song, that 4-year-old put her arms around my neck, looked me straight in the eye, and said, Dad, I love you like meat loves salt. And emails from Anna still come to me that say, meat loves salt at the end. Now, do you see what that story did was gave her a way to express that which is deepest in her heart in a new way. That's what parables are. They are that which is deepest in God's heart, expressed to us in a story. You see, That's what Jesus is doing in these stories, is expressing the deepest thoughts and feelings in God's heart in a manner that we can get it. That we can say, oh, I never heard it that way before. And that's what parables are at the best, on the best day, at the best moment. Elie Wiesel wrote, when the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There he would light a fire, say a prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Metzrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, listen, I don't know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer. And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassow, in order to save his people once more, would go into the forest and say, I don't know how to light the fire, I don't know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rishon to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God, I'm unable to light the fire, and I don't know the prayer, and I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is to tell the story. And that was sufficient. God made humans because God loves stories. And this is at the beginning of Wiesel's The Gates of the Forest. It's a kind of a preface to that book. What I want you to do today is to hear different voices tell stories. And so one story I'd like you to hear, but I want you not just to listen to the story, but I want you to listen to how Heather Forrest tells it. So Donna, if you'll let us hear that.
The Maggid of Dubno was a wondrous storyteller, Jakob Kranz. He traveled Eastern Europe in the 18th century telling stories, and everywhere he went, people asked him a very important question. They wanted to know why stories are so powerful. Why, they said, does a story go to the heart of a child? Why does a story live on beyond one's life? Why is a story such a powerful tool for change and education? And Jakob Kranz, the Maggid of Dubno, said, I'll tell you a story. It's called Naked Truth and Parable. Naked Truth walked down the street one day. People turned their eyes away. Parable arrived, draped in decoration. People greeted Parable with celebration. Naked Truth sat alone, sad and unattired. Why are you so miserable? Parable inquired. Naked Truth replied, I'm not welcome anymore. No one wants to look at me. They chase me from their door. Oh. It's hard to look at naked truth. Parable explained. Come, let me dress you up a bit, and your welcome will be gained. So Parable dressed naked truth in stories' fine attire, with metaphor and poignant prose and plots to inspire, with laughter and tears and adventure to unveil. Now together they went forth to spin a tale. People opened their doors and served them their best. Naked truth, dressed in story, was a welcome guest. welcome guest.
This was actually, she performed that at the festival one year. I like that. I like the meaning of it, but I also like the fact that it is short and in verse, that she rhymed it all the way through, and it's got the same meter. And I'm wanting you to hear it for that reason as much as the story itself, because it's fascinating that she's taken what is an old story, a well-known story, and put it into a poem, into verse. All right. The title for this Sticky Stories is come from a book that I've really enjoyed over the years called Made to Stick. And its subtitle is Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. And Chip Heath and Dan Heath, who are brothers, one teaches at Duke, one teaches at Stanford, they teach both in the business parts of those schools. They're not at the seminaries. This is a book about communications in business, and they define a message that sticks as a message that is understandable, memorable, and effective in changing thought or behavior. Understandable, memorable, and effective in changing thought or behavior. And they came up with some simple principles that I've given you in your notebook here. And they make fun of themselves for spelling S-U-C-C-E-S. They have to add another little S because they ran out of principles. They point out that they could have arranged these words in any order and it wouldn't have spelled anything. So you can make of that what you want. And we'll talk about these principles real fast here in a minute. The thing is, they talked about a study in which they had a group of people that they divided into two groups. The study, they did not do this. They were talking about this. They divided into two groups, the tappers and the listeners. And each group, the people were paired off. One tapper, one listener. One tapper, one listener. One tapper, one listener. And the assignment was they were given 120 songs to the tapper. And the tapper was simply to take a block and tap the music. So the Star Spangled Banner, Happy Birthday, whatever, they simply were given the block and they were to do that. Now, the listeners did not have the list. They were just told that these people are going to tap a song for you. Now, before they did it, so they went through this exercise, and the listener had to write down, number 1 was this song, number 2, this song, number 3, this song. They didn't do 120 songs, they just did a few each. After they were done, the tapper was asked, how do you think your listener's going to do? How often are they going to get what you tapped? And the tappers guessed 50%. 1 out of every 2. In reality, what happened was that they got 2.5% correct. They got 1 out of every 40 correct. Now, you say, well, why would that be? Their conclusion is that the tapper could hear the tune in their head. But the listener could only hear a weird Morse code. It was just tap, 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 whatever. And so the listener could not make any sense out of what the tapper could hear perfectly well. Now, their point is, and I think it applies very much to preaching, but they call it the curse of knowledge. We hear the tune in our heads, the listener only hears this weird clicking. You see, we know what we're wanting to say. We know what it is we mean. But sometimes the listener doesn't. Sometimes we even do it in code. It frustrates me to drive around the district. It frustrates me to drive anywhere in the summer and to see signs that advertise VBS. What could that possibly mean to a non-Christian? Now, some churches think they're better at it and they don't do VBS. They say Vacation Bible School. Again, not real helpful information to a non-Christian. But you see, we hear the tune in our head. It makes perfect sense to us. But when we're communicating, it doesn't always get heard because we're hearing the tune. And so they said the curse of knowledge, there are two ways to cure it. One, don't ever learn anything. They don't recommend that way. But they said that is a way to beat it. You know, is if you just don't know anything, then you don't have to worry about it. But the other one is take your ideas and transform them so that then the people can hear the whole tune. But that you have to take your ideas and transform them for that to happen. And so, the principles they use is they use SUCCES. Simple, that a message must be simple, unexpected, I have to think, concrete, credible, emotional stories. Okay? Have you all heard the term burying the lead? Do you know what burying the lead means? It's a term that's used in journalism. Is you're writing a news story. The lead is the first sentence. The lead is what the story is really, really about. Burying it is when you put what it's about down in the article instead of leading with it. So the term is you bury the lead. You lose what it's about, you put it down. Now, the reason it was important is in the Civil War, when the press was sending their stories by telegraph. You see, they would start telling the story, and then the military would interrupt the telegraph line and take it over, and then the news person wouldn't get to finish their story. And so all that would go over the line to the other end where the paper was would be whatever they started out with. And so they learned quickly, you have to tell the most important thing first, and then you can tell the rest of the details. In a sense, it's like an inverted pyramid. You put the most important thing first, and then you just work out down to other things that are less important. You see? And sometimes what we do is we start with the little teeny stuff, and we leave the big stuff till later in the communication and the story. And so we bury it. I love one of their statements. They said, there has to be a message triage. Because if you say three things, you don't say anything. And so consequently, what it's about is discarding. It's getting rid of things in order to boil it down to the essence, to get it right down to it. The example, let's see if I had it marked. The difficulty in burying the lead is sometimes we don't hear the lead. And a person gave an example of going to their first day of journalism class. And she was in high school, Nora Ephron. And she was in high school, and she went to her first day of journalism, and, you know, these are all budding journalists. They're in high school. They're going to get this. And the teacher says, okay. And they all had typewriters in front of them and said, now, I'm going to give you the story. Now, remember, it's what, where, when, remember, who, and why, right? Okay? The 5 W's. And the professor went over all that. And then the professor said, okay, and began giving all of the who's. This speaker, this speaker, this speaker are going to speak to the entire faculty of the Hollywood High School next Thursday, October or whatever, gave the place, the time, all this. Said, now write it up. So they all, you know. And they just took what this professor had, rearranged all of the words the professor had said, and just kind of regurgitated it on page. So the professor took all these up, read through them, and said, none of you got the lead. And the professor read these, blah, 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 blah. It was the names of the people speaking, when they were speaking, where they were speaking, all of those things. And the professor said, the lead is, there is no school next Thursday. Because the whole faculty was going to be gone, and it was for a school newspaper. There's no school next Thursday. They missed the lead because they buried it in the facts. They became overwhelmed with the information and missed what it was about. And so, see, that's the difficulty that we always have in communicating, is to pare it down to what is really going on here. You read some of the parables, they're just fascinating. I don't know if you all know this, but Word on your computers has a function that you can know the grade level of what you're writing. Do you all know how to use this function? It's a great tool, and you should learn how to use it. But it gives you the word count. It tells you the grade level. It tells you how many passive sentences are in what you've written. It just spits it all out at the end. It's a great tool because you can read, and you can even analyze one paragraph that way, or you can analyze a whole piece of what you're writing. I use it a lot. So what I did was I typed up some of the parables and then kicked that on. Now you've got to remember, you're dealing with it in English, not in the way Jesus told it, so understand that. But you should just look at the word count of some of the parables. 53 words, 49 words, 112 words. I mean, it's just fascinating. Grade level, 4.8, 5.3. And this is the translation in English. Almost 0% passive sentences. All action sentences. It's just fascinating to analyze the parables in that way. In other words, what I'm saying to you is sometimes you need to look at how Jesus does it, not just what he's doing. Is you need to listen to the parable. Listen to how Jesus does that. So what you do is you get down to the core of don't start with interesting in hopes of entertaining the audience. Instead, work to make the core message itself more interesting. See? When Janice is writing books and she has to turn in a book proposal, the first sentence is critical, and it's all about the hook. But see, the hook is not a small part of the story. It is the story in a sentence or two. And that's the same thing that we have. Proverbs. Cervantes defined Proverbs as short sentences drawn from long experience. Now think about it. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. There's this other guy who uses a proverb. It says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Pretty sharp for one sentence. One point. See. All right, but let me show you a little something that's a trick that Jesus uses a lot. I'm going to show you a series of letters, and I'm going to show it to you for 30 seconds. Now, put your pens down. You're going to look at this series of letters, and then after 30 seconds, I'm going to flip it back up, and you're going to write down the letters that you see. Okay. Write them down. Don't be copying each other. Okay, you got it? All right, now check off. How many did you get? There are 20 letters. How'd you do? 18, that's pretty good. All right. All right, yeah, I'm going to do them again, but what if I do them, they're all in the same order, by the way, but what if I put them like this instead of the way they were written? You're going to have a higher rate of success, aren't you? Now, the interesting thing is, JFK were the first three letters, J, and then the FK were over in the other group. Your brain, when you look at this, thinks John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Okay, so your brain takes those three letters and makes more of it, whereas before, I just gave you the letters, and you didn't have to remember all this stuff about John Fitzgerald Kennedy. You didn't have to remember anything about the FBI, NATO, UPS, NASA, or IRS. But by arranging the letters in this way, you know more than the arrangement of the other way. Because these are information packets. They mean something in themselves. Jesus does it all the time. Okay. There once was a man with 2 sons. Now, wait a minute. If I start the story that way, there once was a man with 2 sons. What story am I about to tell? The prodigal son. Are you sure? Because I remember there once was a man with 2 sons whose names were Cain and Abel. Right? The older son did this, the younger son did that. Jacob and Joseph is not as good of an example, but it is an example because it's the younger son. But there once was a man with 2 sons. So am I telling the story of Abraham? With Esau and Isaac? You see? The prodigal son. That we don't hear what the audience would have heard when Jesus said there once was a man with 2 sons. Because see, they would have heard Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau. They would have heard pairings of 2 sons stories from their tradition.
And 2 really different sons.
Exactly. As the prodigal son is 2 very different sons. Jacob and Esau. Esau and Jacob, okay. All right. But see, the point is the older son gets treated one way and the younger son gets treated another way. Do you see? But see, Jesus is using this technique by evoking other stories with the story he's telling. But we miss it because what we do is we rush to figure out what the meaning is instead of listening to the storyteller. Now, the Heath brothers, see, they would argue, keep it simple. Keep it simple. In the analysis of the parables that I was telling you about when I went through, it's fascinating to me, but Jesus uses very few adjectives and adverbs. It's all nouns and verbs. I mean, read through some of them, think through some of the ones you have. There was a man who had 2 sons. You don't know if he was a fat man or a skinny man. You don't know if the sons were tall or short or old or young or what. Just a man with 2 sons. It's a woman lost 10 coins. You see, you listen to the parables. They're very simple. They are just stripped down to almost nothing. Now we'll talk about later on today. We'll talk about why that is. The second thing is unexpected. Simple, unexpected. A number of years ago, it's a long story, but I had to be on a flight out west with a bunch of national park people and a bunch of FAA people, Federal Aviation Administration people. They were all top-level people. And we got on this flight. Now, you all have all flown. You know what happens at the beginning of a flight, right? The flight attendant stands up and says, FAA regulations require us to tell you, you know. And you're starting to read your book. You've got your pillow around your neck. You're taking your nap, you know, everything. So here I'm on this flight, and we're about to take off, and you've got all of the top people of the FAA, you know, the people who made the rule that you have to do this speech. And so now this flight attendant has to stand up and do the speech in front of the FAA. He got up and he said, "Hi, the FAA requires me to tell you these things." He held up the belt buckle. He said, "For those of you that haven't been in a car since 1965, here is how you buckle a seatbelt." And then he proceeded to go through the most tongue-in-cheek, hilarious rendition of that in front of the FAA, making fun of them for making him have to say this thing over and over again. But the whole place broke up in laughter, and everybody listened to every word the guy said. It was an unexpected approach to something that we expected to go a different way. And we actually all listened to the silly safety thing that we had all ignored for years. You see, you sneak up on people, you do the unexpected. Surprise gets our attention. But now here's the corollary. Surprise gets our attention, interest keeps it. Getting the attention is not just it. You've got to keep doing things that keeps their interest. It's not enough to be surprising. It requires insight as well. So you identify the central message you need to communicate. Find the core. Figure out what is counterintuitive about that message. What are the unexpected implications of your core message? Why isn't it already happening naturally? And then communicate your message in a way that breaks your audience guessing machines along the critical counterintuitive dimension. You see, you figure out what it is you're trying to say, then you look at it in a different way, from a different angle. You arrange the letters differently. You see? And then it keeps their attention. They stay with you. Okay? And then, you see, the best way to get people's attention is to break their existing schemas. Whatever they think, you try to break that, and that surprises them. I mean, think about it, y'all. That's what makes a joke work. Right? And I've got granddaughters that are in the joke-telling age. And I mean, I'm just having a blast again because I'm getting to rework all the old jokes that I told years ago to a whole new audience now. And I mean, it's just great, for me anyway. But they're learning to tell jokes, see? And they're learning the pattern of joke-telling. Anastasia, a couple years ago, Anastasia came up to me and she said, hey, Granddaddy, what does a fish say when it bumps into a wall? Damn. And so, I just loved that. I laughed. I thought, this is great, you know. So, Ainsley overheard Anastasia tell the joke and heard me laughing. So she thought, I'm going to take a shot at this. So later on, she comes up and she says, hey, Granddaddy, a fish bumped into a dam. That was the whole joke, okay? That was it. Well, I got it, and I thought, that's still pretty funny. I mean, she's trying. My favorite one was Allie heard it. She's the youngest of the group. She came up later and said, Granddaddy, why did the fish cross the road? See, and so, I mean, you know, she got the idea there's something in the pattern there. I don't quite have it yet, but there's something in the pattern there. Now, you got to admit, that was funny anyway, and so I laughed, and it worked for her. But see, that's what makes a joke work, is it's the unexpected. It's the unexpected twist at the end of a joke that makes it work and makes you able to remember how to tell it. So, simple, unexpected, concrete, specific people doing specific things. Stay away from abstract speech. It's a killer in any kind of communication. Again, you see, that's when we go back to tapping. When we think we hear the tune in our heads, it makes perfect sense to us. But to keep it concrete. But again, think about parables in this lens. Concrete things. There's a woman, she's lost a coin. She turns over everything to find it. That's the whole story. You see? Very simple. There are unexpected endings to the stories very often. Unexpected elements in the stories. and then they're very concrete. Jesus is always pulling things from kitchens and from gardens and from just stuff that people were around all the time. He doesn't require you to think through something else. It's just concrete kind of things. Credible, a little tougher, but credibility, what I would argue is credibility comes from the teller. You see? And so credibility comes from, I would argue, from the way you listen to the audience. Your credibility comes from that listening that takes place. What people often do is try to build credibility in the story or in the communication. And so, consequently, they give a lot of facts. See, now, in their world, they were arguing against graphs. We don't use really many graphs in sermons, but we do use our exegesis to try to help people understand that we know what we're talking about. You see what I mean? So we try to build credibility while we're doing it. That's not the moment to build credibility. That's not going to help you a lot, because what it's going to do is bury the lead. I always, and some of you all have heard me say this before, exegesis is like underwear, okay? You ought to be wearing it, but you shouldn't be showing it to anybody, okay? That's exegesis. The old way of talking about underwear was foundation garments, okay? That's what exegesis is. It's foundation. It's the part of the house you don't see, but it kind of holds everything up. So you need to do your homework. See, this isn't a way to get out of doing homework. It's, if anything, it's an argument that you have to do more homework. But you have to learn it. But see, you don't need to tell people what the Greek is all about. And oh, I know this Greek word, and I know this Greek word, and I know this Hebrew word. See, that's burying the lead. And it's not going to build your credibility. It sounds like you're more credible, but it's not going to help the message part. So credibility comes from the manner in which we communicate and who's doing the communicating, that kind of thing. All right, and then emotional is just that. Stories can carry emotion that facts can't. And the best example I can give you is what we did in 2013 in the conference with Imagine No Malaria. We gave people facts. None of you, I would argue, can probably regurgitate any of the facts about how many people were dying of malaria. What you do remember is $10 saves a life. And that became an emotional level message, not a factual one. It was simple. It was concrete. $10 saves a life. You see, it was unexpected. What? $10 can do that? Well, how can $10 do that? Oh, well, we have medicine and nets and education that we could tell you. But you see, we kept it simple. We went unexpected. We stayed concrete. $10 saves a life. It was credible because we were focusing on one life, not on millions of people dying. Look at any nonprofit that's doing a good job with their fundraising, and it's always going to be focused on a very specific thing. A project, a person, something like that. It's not going to be educate thousands of people with your dollar. It's not that. People who are doing it effectively stay to these kind of principles and do that. And then the final thing, in which we're going to spend the rest of the day talking about, is, and then you put all this in story, in a narrative form. And that's what people remember, is that story. All right, now I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. We need to take a break. There's There's snacks in the back, and you need to stand up and move around a little bit. So let's take a break, and I'm going to turn this off. I'm telling Donna. Okay, thanks. Because it makes a